We've been very lucky. My mother was the Queen for a very long time. And although you kind of know that this might happen, you don't really think about it very much. Not least of all because the monarchy is about continuity. But I think for my brother, this is something he's...
Have you ever wondered, what if the most important decision inside the royal family was never announced to the public? Not because it involved the throne, not because it changed the line of succession, but because it involved something far more valuable: trust. Imagine a quiet evening inside Windsor Castle. The cameras had gone, the crowds had disappeared, the palace corridors echoed with nothing more than distant footsteps. It looked like an ordinary royal evening, but behind one closed door, a conversation was about to begin that, if it had happened, could have changed the future of the monarchy forever. For decades, Princess Anne had earned a reputation unlike almost anyone else in the royal family. She rarely searched for headlines. She rarely answered criticism. Instead, she worked quietly, day after day, year after year. Many royal commentators have often described her as one of the hardest-working members of the family. She believed actions mattered more than speeches, and perhaps that was exactly why everyone listened whenever she finally decided to speak. On this fictional evening, Anne had invited only a handful of people to Windsor Castle: King Charles, Prince William, Catherine, and several trusted advisors. No journalists knew about the meeting, no photographers waited outside, even palace staff had been told very little. The invitation simply read, no explanation, no agenda, only a date and a time. As Prince William walked through the castle entrance, he immediately sensed something unusual. Normally, Princess Anne greeted guests with her familiar smile. Tonight, she stood quietly beside one of the tall windows overlooking the gardens. Her expression wasn't worried. It wasn't fearful. It was thoughtful. Almost as though she had already reached a decision. William glanced toward Catherine. She noticed it too. Neither of them asked questions. Sometimes, silence reveals more than words ever could. A few minutes later, King Charles entered the room. Everyone stood. He greeted each family member warmly before taking his seat. Although he smiled, there was something different about his expression. Leadership carries enormous responsibility, especially when every decision is watched by millions around the world. Charles understood something his mother had demonstrated throughout her reign. A monarch may lead a nation, but leading a family can often be the greater challenge. Families remember disagreements. They remember misunderstandings. They remember moments the public never sees, and over time, someone must quietly keep those relationships together. As everyone settled into their seats, Princess Anne finally broke the silence. Thank you all for coming. Her voice remained calm. I've been thinking about the future. Nobody interrupted. The future isn't only about institutions. It isn't only about tradition. It's about people. It's about who helps a family stay united when life becomes difficult. The room became completely still. William looked toward his father. Charles simply nodded. He already knew what Anne intended to discuss. Catherine listened carefully. She had no idea that the conversation would soon become deeply personal. Anne slowly stood and walked toward one of the old portraits hanging inside the room. For generations, the walls of Windsor Castle had witnessed moments of celebration, moments of uncertainty, and moments that history would never record. Without turning around, Anne quietly asked, "What keeps a family together?" No one answered immediately. Several possibilities crossed their minds: duty, tradition, respect, responsibility. Finally, Catherine spoke. "I think it's trust." Anne slowly smiled. "Exactly." She turned back toward the group. "Trust isn't inherited. It can't be awarded. It can't be demanded. It has to be earned." Charles lowered his eyes for a moment. The words reminded him of lessons his mother had repeated throughout his life. Princess Anne continued, "For years, I've watched each of you carry different responsibilities. But one responsibility often goes unnoticed: the responsibility of bringing people together." Her words echoed through the room. William folded his hands quietly. He sensed this conversation was leading somewhere important. Anne looked directly at Catherine. "I've watched how you speak with staff. I've watched how you support William. I've watched how you remain calm during difficult moments. And I've noticed something. When people leave a conversation with you, they usually leave feeling heard. Catherine appeared surprised. "I've only tried to do my best." Anne smiled warmly. "Sometimes, doing your best becomes the greatest form of leadership." The room fell silent again. Outside, the evening rain gently tapped against the castle windows. Inside, every person seemed lost in thought. Then, a palace aide quietly entered the room carrying a small leather folder. He placed it in front of King Charles. No explanation, no words. Charles thanked him with a slight nod. The aide immediately left. William glanced at the folder. Its cover bore the royal crest. Beneath it, one simple word. Charles rested his hand on the folder. He didn't open it. Not yet. Instead, he looked toward Princess Anne. "Are you certain?" Anne answered without hesitation. "Yes. It is time." Catherine looked from Anne to the king. She didn't understand what they meant. Neither did William. The only thing everyone knew was that whatever was inside that folder had been prepared long before today's meeting, and whatever decision it contained would affect everyone in the room. Charles finally reached for the clasp. The folder slowly opened. Inside lay a single handwritten page. He quietly began reading. As his eyes moved across the paper, his expression changed, not with shock, not with disappointment, but with quiet understanding. After several moments, he closed the folder once more. He looked around the room, then calmly said, "I believe. Everyone deserves to hear this." But before the document could be read aloud, a sudden knock echoed through the room. The doors slowly opened. A palace messenger stepped inside carrying an urgent envelope marked, "Immediate." The messenger bowed respectfully. "Your Majesty, this has just arrived." Charles accepted the envelope. "Read the first line," and for the first time that evening, the smile disappeared from his face. What if Princess Anne made one final decision that changed the royal family forever? The room remained completely silent. Every pair of eyes was fixed on King Charles. The envelope still rested in his hands. For a brief moment, no one dared to ask what it contained. Charles slowly looked toward Princess Anne, then back at the letter. Finally, he folded it carefully and placed it beside the confidential folder. "There has been a slight change of plans," he said calmly. "But first, we must finish what we started." The atmosphere inside the room instantly became heavier. Even the sound of the fireplace seemed louder than before. William quietly exchanged a glance with Catherine. Neither of them understood why the king's expression had suddenly changed, but they both sensed something far bigger was unfolding. The confidential folder. Charles slowly reopened the leather folder. Inside was a single handwritten report prepared by Princess Anne over several months. It wasn't about royal titles. It wasn't about succession. It wasn't about changing tradition. Instead, it carried one simple heading: protecting the future of family unity. Charles looked around the room. This document doesn't choose a leader. It recognizes someone who has quietly earned trust. He paused before continuing. "For many years, my sister has carefully observed how each member of this family handles responsibility." Anne lowered her eyes. She had never wanted attention. She only wanted the family to remain united. Years of quiet observation. Anne slowly stood. "I never intended to write this, but after many years, I realized something. When families face pressure, they don't always need stronger leaders. They need calmer hearts." The room listened carefully. "I've watched how disagreements begin. I've watched how misunderstandings grow. And I've watched who quietly brings people back together." She smiled gently toward Catherine. "Sometimes, the strongest voice is the one that speaks the least." Catherine looked genuinely surprised. She had expected advice, not recognition. William speaks honestly. William finally broke the silence. "Aunt Anne, why me?" Anne smiled. "This isn't about you. It's about both of you." William looked confused. Anne continued. "You've always protected your family. But Catherine, she protects people." The room became silent once again. William looked toward his wife. For years, he had watched her encourage others without asking for recognition, comfort staff members after difficult days, support charitable causes quietly, listen before speaking. Perhaps, Anne had noticed those moments long before anyone else. The king's memory Charles slowly walked toward an old portrait of Queen Elizabeth II. For several moments, he remained silent. "When I was younger, my mother once told me something. Never judge a person by the room they enter. Judge them by the peace they leave behind after they walk away. Charles smiled softly. I didn't fully understand those words then. I do now. He turned toward Catherine. I've seen that peace follow you many times. An unexpected visitor. Before anyone could respond, a gentle knock interrupted the meeting. The doors slowly opened. One of the senior palace advisors entered. He bowed respectfully. Your Majesty, I'm sorry for interrupting, but several members of the press have begun asking questions. William frowned. How? No one was supposed to know about today's meeting. The advisor shook his head. We're not certain, but speculation has already started. Charles sighed quietly. Then we'll say nothing. The public doesn't need every private conversation. The advisor nodded before leaving. The doors quietly closed once again. Catherine finally speaks. For the first time since the meeting began. Catherine stood. She looked first toward Anne, then toward the king. I'm honored, but I don't believe one person can hold a family together. She smiled gently. Families remain strong when everyone chooses kindness. Anne nodded proudly. Exactly. That's why I believe you're ready. Catherine lowered her eyes. I've never wanted recognition. I only wanted to support those around me. Charles smiled. And that's precisely why people trust you. The letter Anne never shared, Anne slowly reached into her handbag. She removed a folded letter. This has remained private for many years. She carefully unfolded it. It reminds me that every generation must prepare the next. She smiled before placing it back into the envelope. I've carried these words with me for a long time. And today, I believe it's finally time to pass their meaning forward. No one asked what the letter said. Some things didn't need to be read aloud. A conversation on the balcony. Later that evening, Anne quietly stepped onto one of Windsor Castle's balconies. William joined her a few moments later. I've never seen you this emotional. Anne laughed softly. Neither have I. William looked across the gardens. Do you really believe the future will be different? Anne answered without hesitation. I believe every generation gets one chance to leave things a little better than they found them. William nodded. I hope we can. Anne smiled. I think you already have. Meanwhile, inside the castle, Charles remained alone in his study. The confidential folder still rested on his desk. Beside it lay the urgent envelope delivered earlier that day. He slowly picked it up again. This time, he read every line carefully. His expression became thoughtful. Then he quietly reached for the telephone. Within minutes, private secretaries hurried through the palace corridors. Every senior royal received another message. Please remain at Windsor Castle until tomorrow morning. No explanation. Only the king's personal request. Cliffhanger. Late that night, as rain began falling outside, a palace employee quietly locked the council room. Before leaving, he noticed something unusual. The confidential folder was no longer on the table. It had disappeared. No one had seen who removed it. No one knew where it had gone. And hidden somewhere inside Windsor Castle, that missing document now held the answer to a question that could change everything. What if Princess Anne made one final decision that changed the royal family forever? The rain continued to fall over Windsor Castle, long after everyone had retired to their rooms. One mystery remained unsolved. The confidential folder had disappeared. No one knew who had taken it. No one knew why. But everyone understood one thing. Whatever was inside those pages had suddenly become far more important than anyone had imagined. An unexpected discovery. Early the next morning, the castle slowly came to life. Staff prepared breakfast. Private secretaries reviewed the day's schedule. Yet inside the king's private study, the atmosphere remained tense. King Charles stood beside his desk, looking out across the gardens. A gentle knock interrupted his thoughts. Come in. The door opened. It was the king's private secretary. Your Majesty, I believe we've found the folder. Charles turned immediately. Where was it? The secretary smiled. Exactly where Princess Anne left it. Charles looked confused. She moved it herself? The secretary nodded. She wanted everyone to focus on the conversation, not the document. For the first time that morning, Charles smiled. That sounds exactly like Anne. The final family meeting within the hour. The family gathered once again. The mood felt lighter than the evening before. Princess Anne quietly entered carrying the leather folder herself. William laughed softly. So it was you. Anne smiled. I simply wanted everyone to remember something. Documents don't build families. People do. The room filled with quiet smiles. Even the tension that had surrounded the previous evening seemed to disappear. A lesson, instead of an announcement. Anne placed the folder on the table. I could read every page. I could explain every recommendation. But none of that matters if we forget the real lesson. She looked toward every member of the family. Titles change, responsibilities change, even generations change. But kindness must never change. Charles nodded proudly. That's the message worth remembering. Catherine's response. Catherine slowly stood. She looked around the room before speaking. I've never believed leadership belongs to one person. It belongs to every person willing to help another. I don't have all the answers. I never will. But I promise this. I'll continue listening. I'll continue learning. And I'll continue serving with respect. The room remained silent. Not because anyone disagreed, but because her words felt genuine. William smiled with quiet pride. William's promise. William stepped beside Catherine. My grandmother taught us that duty isn't about receiving recognition. It's about doing what's right. Even when no one notices, he turned toward Princess Anne. You've shown us that for decades. Anne gently laughed. I simply tried to do my job, William smiled. And you did it extraordinarily well. The king's final words. Charles slowly walked toward the castle window. Sunlight was beginning to break through the clouds. He looked across the gardens before speaking. When history remembers families, it often remembers great celebrations. It remembers ceremonies. It remembers photographs. But I've learned, the moments that truly shape a family usually happen in private. He turned back toward everyone. No speech, no title, no document will ever matter more than the way we treat one another. Everyone quietly nodded. Princess Anne's legacy. Anne carefully closed the leather folder. I never wanted this document to become history. I wanted its message to become habit. She looked toward Catherine. The future isn't protected by one person. It's protected by everyone willing to choose patience over anger, understanding over pride, and hope over fear. Catherine smiled. I'll remember that. Anne nodded. I know you will. A new morning. The family meeting came to an end. Outside, the rain had stopped. Sunlight reflected across the castle grounds. Staff members returned to their daily routines. Visitors gathered outside the palace gates. Life continued exactly as it always had. Yet inside Windsor Castle, something had quietly changed. Not because a new title had been created, not because any royal tradition had been rewritten, but because everyone had been reminded that unity is built one conversation at a time. Closing narration history often celebrates kings and queens. It remembers crowns, ceremonies, and famous moments captured by cameras. But perhaps the strongest legacy isn't created in front of the world. Perhaps it's created behind closed doors, when people choose compassion instead of conflict, when they choose understanding instead of misunderstanding, and when they remember that every family, no matter how famous, becomes stronger through trust, respect, and kindness. If this fictional what-if story made you think, let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to Royal Blames, and turn on notifications so you never miss our next cinematic royal story. Until next time, thank you for watching.